Hello, my name is Michael Walker. I'm a student at the University of Alaska at Anchorage and the mathematics program. This presentation is on Alaska Native mortality and how it compares with the mortality of other races, specifically Caucasian/white. And this is for my intro to demographics class. The Alaska Native population experiences a higher rate of mortality compared to the other races in Alaska, almost double than the other races and in specific cases. I mainly looked at the data representing post-neonatal age range, adults, and homicide rate. I obtained this data from articles through Academic Search Premier and CDC data. While using Academic Search Premier, I used terms like Alaska Native population, the mortality, and post-neonatal. Overall, the mortality rate in the Caucasian community has seen a decrease, and we do see this decrease in the Alaska Native population, just not to the same degree. And we see a huge disparity between the two populations as well. This is interesting because the Alaska Native population gets health care for, if not free, then at a much lower rate in most incidences. I did not look at possible solutions or reasons for this disparity. My purpose for this presentation is to bring to light the disparity that the communities have in mortality so more people know about it. Mortality affects everyone, either directly or indirectly. It is something that we can not get away from or remove from our lives, but we can lessen it to a degree. Over the years, with advances in healthcare and self-care, we have been able to reduce the mortality rate in all areas and races/ethnicities. We see the impact of mortality within the healthcare sector, the workplaces of the people who have passed away, and within the family and friends of those people. If we can lower the Alaskan Native mortality rate, then we can lower all these impacts. And we can also better preserve the knowledge and beautiful culture that the Alaska Native population has. Now on to the data. Firstly, I will talk about post-neonatal mortality. So between the years of 1992 and 1995, we see that the post-neonatal deaths for Alaska Native population, 37 of those were attributed to sudden infant death syndrome, 9 were due to congenital anomalies, infections caused 12, and 6 were unknown. Within the white community, 94, and not just the white community actually, overall in the Alaska Native population, 94 were attributed to sudden infant death syndrome, 26 were due to congenital anomalies, and 27 were caused by infections, and 19 were unknown. Between 1996 and 1999, 67 deaths overall in Alaska were caused by sudden infant death syndrome, where in the Alaska Native population, we see 29 were caused by this sudden infant death syndrome. 11 were due to preterm births, and 34 were due to congenital anomalies, and infections caused 27. Within the Alaska Native population, we see that 5 were due to preterm births, 10 were due to congenital anomalies, and 13 were due to infections. Between 2000 and 2003, overall, we see 67 were attributed to sudden infant death syndrome, 15 were due to preterm births, 23 were due to congenital anomalies, and 35 were due to infections. 15 were unknown. Within the Alaska Native population now, we see that 8 were unknown, infections caused 19, 12 were due to congenital anomalies, 10 were due to preterm births, and 35 were due to sudden infant death syndrome. Between 2004 and 2007, in the Alaska Native population, we see 29 were attributed to sudden infant death syndrome, 15 were due to congenital anomalies, 6 were caused by injury, and infections caused 12, and 9 were unknown. Then overall, we see that 58 were due to the sudden infant death syndrome, 27 were caused by congenital end anomalies, 15 are due to injury, and infections caused 28, and then 13 were unknown. And using the CDC morbidity and mortality weekly report for Alaska between 1989 and 2009, is found that the annual post-neonatal mortality rate overall decreased. In 1989, it was 4.9 deaths per 1,000 births, and in 2009, it was 3.9 deaths per 1,000 births. But when looking at the neonatal mortality rate for Alaska Natives, we see that the rate is much higher within the Alaska Native community. In 1989, it was around 10.9 per 1,000 births, and in 2009, it was around 7 deaths per 1,000 births. Thus, there is still a disparity between these two communities. Now moving on to research that was done before this presentation, there was 3 things that were identified to be independent factors that are connected with an increase in post-neonatal mortality among Alaska Native infants compared to non-Alaska Native infants. These 3 factors were low maternal education, prenatal substance use of any kind, and unmarried marital status combined with the father's name not being on the birth certificate. The occurrence of these factors among Alaska Natives births increased during 2000 to 2009. When a father was listed or the mother was married, the infant was 3 times more likely to survive in the post-neonatal period than ones without. Now, moving on to adults, we see that this disparity continues. And so between 1989 and 1989 for Alaska Native and white females, this is deaths per 100,000. We see that cancer caused 145.7 within the Alaska Native community. Heart disease caused 95.5, unintentional injuries caused 60.4, cerebrovascular disease caused 41.2, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease caused 26.5, influenza and pneumonia caused 19.1, and chronic liver disease caused 18.8. And then for the Caucasian community, we see 108.9 for cancer, 96.8 for heart disease, 17.3 for unintentional injuries, 22.9 for cerebrovascular disease, 17.2 for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, 10.2 for influenza pneumonia, and 4.6 was due to chronic liver disease. Now going on to the males, for deaths per 100,000, we see that cancer caused 163.7 within the Alaska Native community, 143.4 were due to heart disease, 118.6 were due to unintentional injury, 49.7 were caused by suicide, 36.4 were due to cerebrovascular disease, 34.4 were due to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and influenza and pneumonia caused 23.7. Now within the Caucasian area / community, we see 127.7 were caused by cancer, 136.4 were due to heart disease, 30.3 were due to unintentional injury, 11.8 were due to suicide, 24.6 were due to cerebrovascular disease, 21.1 were due to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and 12.6 were caused by influenza and pneumonia. Now, between 1999 and 2009, for females, we see that, and this is for deaths per 100,000, we see that within the Alaska Native community, we see that cancer was still the leading cause with 232.6. For heart disease, it was 172.9 deaths. Unintentional injuries caused 72.6. Stroke caused 71.2. Chronic lower respiratory disease caused 64.1. Influenza and pneumonia caused 30. Chronic liver disease caused 27. And then within the white community, we see 155.5 for cancer, Heart disease caused 127.9. 27.7 were due to unintentional injuries. Stroke caused 48.6. Chronic lower respiratory disease caused 40.7. Influenza and pneumonia caused 11.3. And chronic liver disease caused 6.2. Now for male deaths per 100,000 for this time period, I'll go over the Caucasian community first. We see that cancer caused 207.2, heart disease caused 208.9, unintentional injury caused 66.1, chronic lower respiratory disease caused 49.9, stroke caused 49, suicide caused 27.9, and influenza and pneumonia caused 14.2. Now within the Alaska Native community, we see that cancer caused 298.7, heart disease caused 269.3, unintentional injury caused 166.5, 77.2 were due to chronic lower respiratory diseases, 77 were due to stroke, 65.4 were due to suicide, and 44.2 were due to influenza and pneumonia. Now moving on to homicide. This is important to look at because it is a big problem in Alaska. And between 1999 and 2009, within the Alaska Native population, and this is per age group and also per 100,000 people. Under 25, we see that there were 10 homicides. 25 to 44, we see 20.7. 45 to 64, we see 12.3. And 11.6 were 65 to 84. And 18.4 were people were over the age of 85 when they died of homicide. Now for the white community, we see that they experienced, for people under 25, 3.3 deaths were caused by homicide, 5.7 were due to homicide, and that was for the age range 25 to 44, 3.7 for the age group 45 to 64, and 65 to 84 age range, we see 1.4. And then for people over 85, it was not calculable. And so this also shows that the homicide rate is much higher within the Alaska Native community than it is within the white community. And so this affects everyone, not just the Alaska Native people. It does affect them directly, but it affects all of Alaska through monetary means, medical resources, and a death of a person also just has a wave effect through the friends, family, and coworkers that were in that person's life. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you gained a new understanding of how the Alaska Native population is affected by mortality. Thank you.